Welcome back to the On Track video cast. I'm your host, Karen Martel, and today we're talking about a bunch of different stuff. We're going to be talking about parasitic infections of the gut and how that can be impacting you and your health, as well as eating disorders, self-image, and that holistic look at your health and how important it is to be taking care of yourself as a woman when it comes to whatever journey you're on when it comes to your health. And with me today is a lovely, another Canadian nutritionist, a fellow Canadian nutritionist, which I'm so excited about. She's only a few provinces over in Saskatchewan. Her name is Meg Doll. She is a registered holistic nutritionist who works with women to help them lead a life free of restriction, guilt, fear, and shame. Right up my alley, Meg. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yay. Yes. And I went onto Meg's site and she just talks about everything that I'm always talking about here on this video cast, as well as in my groups and the work that I do. And she is just right alongside with me. She's all about incorporating the holistic view of women's health and making sure that we take care of ourselves and applying the science with the spiritual part as well. So I'm excited to have you here. So can you tell us, because you have your own story, just like I think we all do. And reading your story was really touching actually on your website. I really appreciated just how authentic you were and just told your story. So if you could share that with our audience, I would sure appreciate it.
Wow. Well, thank you. Yeah, we definitely all have our own story. And I mean, it starts all the way back, right? But I think where I usually start my story is when I was 10 years old. I was diagnosed with an eating disorder. So at 10 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. And that actually happened after a period of time where I was complaining of really severe stomach aches. And, looking back, I'm 26 now. And so looking back to the time when I was 10 and what I can remember, all of this truly started from terrible stomach aches.
Wow.
And from there, I just started eating less and less. And as someone who has overcome eating disorders and helps women overcome eating disorders and just support them through that journey as well, I truly believe that as our mind becomes more malnourished, that can trigger an eating disorder to begin, right? So it all started with really, really bad stomach aches, the doctor just pushing me aside, of course. So that would have been back in like 2001. So not a lot of, holistic health practitioners like we have today. And I obviously as well grew up in a family that just went with, modern day medicine. So didn't seek out alternative practices or alternative opinions. So I remember a doctor just saying it was a viral infection just to, let it go its course. And so I continued eating less and less. And then a family member of mine passed away. And this was the very first family member of mine to ever pass away. He had cancer. And it was the first close person to me to pass away. And this was at 10 years old. And I believe, obviously there was some trauma happening in my gut at the time. And also my malnourished mind, the way that I coped with this death was, it turned into an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. And from there I struggled for, I was in recovery and it took me about a year. I remember my grade 5 was the year that I was really, going through a lot of this stuff. And by the time I got back to school in grade 6, I was recovered and I was able to live, several years of my life not thinking about food and just enjoying life as a typical like preteen girl would. So
sorry to interject,
No.
yeah, this is heartbreaking. My daughter's the same age as she's 10. So it just makes me sympathize so much because I know how little that person is that is 10.
Mm-hmm.
So in that recovery process, how did you start to recover from the gut pain and the eating disorder?
Yeah, that honestly is such a great question. So the gut pain like really didn't ever get addressed. No doctors could help, did help me. And everyone just assumed it was me making that up because of an eating disorder. And I think I just accepted that for myself as well, right? It's like maybe my mind is playing games on me. And I was just told I had an eating disorder. And as I'm sure, I don't know, I would love to hear what you have to say about this, but your 10-year-old daughter, does she even know what an eating disorder is?
No, she would have no idea what it is.
And I mean, you can only imagine me at 10 years old back in 2001, where eating disorders were not even talked about that much. I had no idea what that was either, right? I was just being told I had something and I needed to eat again. And that was kind of it. My parents were obviously extremely supportive. I was in hospital for just a really, really short chunk of time, less than a few days, honestly, really short. I am a very determined and strong-willed person. So if I didn't want to be in the hospital, I was not in the hospital. But I basically said to my parents, here, I'll prove to you that I'm going to eat. And I just kind of did. Right. And I think it was easier for me at 10 years old to overcome an eating disorder than it was for me at the age of 15, because like I said, I didn't understand what an eating disorder was. I really didn't understand anything that was going on. And I was 10 years old. My parents had so much control over what I did and what I ate that it was really easy for me to recover from.
Right. Because really it was because of the stomach pain. You probably just made that decision. Hey, I'm going to eat my way through this. You guys want me to eat, I'll eat. It's not, you weren't purposely trying to not eat. You weren't eating because you had stomach pain, which is quite common in kids.
Absolutely. And then I do want to make it clear that it definitely did turn into an eating disorder. I saw social workers, and there was definitely a psychological component that did come into play. But as I said, as I continue to nourish my body, that resolved itself. And like I said, I carried on from grade 6 to grade 10 without ever thinking about my body, food, and disordered eating. So it did take a team of health professionals for sure, and doctors monitoring me, but it really did come down to my parents, helping me eat again and eat properly. So that's really what helped me get through that time of my life. But as I mentioned, come to age 15, grade 10 time period, I did lose another family member. This time it was my grandpa. We were super close. And at the time I was also dealing with really, really, really low self-confidence. Low meaning absolutely zero self-confidence. I had horrible body image, and I was being picked on a lot at school. I think, those early years of high school can be so terrible. And
terrible. There's no worse time, I swear.
No. I have friends that will tell me to this day that high school was their best time of their life. And I would not even accept any amount of money to go back to high school.
I am with you 100%. And same as you, my eating disorder started at grade 10, very similar reasons, just horrible body image, and was so disconnected from my body. It was horrible, which led into, bulimia and just horrible. So yes, carry on.
You get it. But yeah,
yes.
grade 10, it was very difficult. And as I kind of mentioned before, at this period in my life, it was a lot more challenging to overcome this eating disorder. I knew so much more. When you're 15 years old, you have more independence than you did back when you were 10 years old. It's crazy how much can change in 5 years, but a lot changes. And I was very, very consumed in this eating disorder. These were the most challenging years of my life for sure. And it took me a long time to overcome, all of that. And I, again, had the incredible support of my mom and dad, which I'm so grateful for, because many of the people that I've worked with throughout the years, through their eating disorder recovery journey, like their parents aren't as supportive as mine were, and mine would have literally done anything for me, and they did. So, including, trips, I went to go see a dietitian 2 times a week. I went for blood work weekly. I went to go see a psychologist who lived 3 hours away weekly. So, a lot of health professionals that were on my eating disorder recovery team. But my dad always assured me that the more people on my team, the better. And so we just kind of made sure that we always had supportive people in my recovery team. And finally, the year after I graduated from high school, so throughout 2010, I really made great progress, and I moved away to London, Ontario, because I just felt like I needed to get the heck out of my hometown and kind of get to know me, and kind of how you touched on, when you do go through an eating disorder, you are so out of touch with yourself and very disconnected. And I was going through this huge change in my life, and I just felt like I needed to go and do something for me. So I moved, 30 hours away from home to study foods and nutrition. So my dietitian played a huge role in my recovery, and she inspired me to go study the same thing that she did. So it was my dream to become a dietitian, and I have a Bachelor of Science in Food and Nutrition today. However, by the end of my studies there, I wasn't feeling as though I wanted to do an internship to become a dietitian. I instead went on and studied holistic nutrition. And that's really what brings me to where I am today. And studying holistic nutrition really changed my relationship with food, and also just the way I view food and understand food. And I knew that going into a natural nutrition, holistic nutrition program, that is what I needed to kind of really have this different relationship with food.
Wow. Yeah, amazing. So, and now you work with women that have eating disorders, because it doesn't always stop as teenagers, does it? It really, there's a lot of women nowadays that are still struggling with it. Maybe even not to the degree of anorexia or bulimia, but to the degree that there's a very unhealthy relationship with their food.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And there is a difference between eating disorders and disordered eating. And, although I do support women going through eating disorders, the majority of the work that I do is with women with just disordered eating, right?
Can you go into that a little bit, what that means, disordered eating?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, there's, normal eating and a healthy relationship with food. And most commonly, I think there's disordered eating. And I know you asked for like the difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating. So an eating disorder is an actual diagnosis. It's a mental illness that you need to be diagnosed with and obviously taken very seriously. So when I do support someone going through an actual diagnosed eating disorder, it's not just me supporting them. There's a huge health team like I had, right? And I'm just one piece of that puzzle. With disordered eating, it can be really anything, and it's not a diagnosis. It's not a like classified mental illness, right? It's really what so many of us women have and might not really even realize, right? Mm-hmm. But I think disordered eating, I don't even have a like concrete definition for it because it can be so many things. And I know with every podcast interview that I do, there's so many women that contact me after and say, I didn't really realize that I had a weird or disordered relationship with food, but I definitely do, and I think if you don't have a healthy relationship with food.
Yeah, do you have any examples of clients that would give somebody an idea of what disordered eating is?
Sure. So MyFitnessPal or any calorie counting app or like database, if you have a fear of not using that and you feel as though you can only eat if you track your food, that would be disordered eating. When there's fear involved, when there's anxiety involved. Another example would be if you get really anxious every single time that someone suggests to go out to eat dinner. That would be another example. A few examples from my life where this was a period of time when I had overcome anorexia. So, again, I was over my eating disorder. However, I definitely was holding on to like disordered eating tendencies is what I like to call them. So I had a fear of eating carbohydrates at nighttime. Like I would only eat like protein and vegetables, and all of my carbohydrates had to be like first thing in the morning. Another fear would be I had to eat 6 meals a day. I had a very, very intense fear after overcoming anorexia. I had a very intense fear of under eating, which is, I was very small at the time and people still thought I had an eating disorder, but anorexia is a fear of, gaining weight and a fear of food. And I was like scared of not eating enough. So that was another like kind of twist into my journey. And I actually don't think I've ever shared that on a podcast before. So there you go. Yeah, I, had a lot of these like fears and weird behaviors. So, I wasn't someone who could eat brunch. I had to eat as soon as I woke up and 6 times throughout the day. So any type of behavior that's really like regimented and rigid and strict, right? Those would be some examples of disordered eating. I come from more of like a restrictive background, but a lot of people that I work with also have dealt with like overeating or emotional eating or binge eating. And I really, really try to not use that term binge eating. But again, it's a like diagnosed illness, right? But the like that sort of thing, like if you find you are, doing that repetitively and you're kind of in that cycle, that would be another like disordered eating tendency or behavior. Mm-hmm.
I definitely know from my past experience with food and having disordered eating, I have to be very careful even now, like 20 years later, if I, decide to go on a detox or something where I'm having to suddenly put abnormal restrictions on what I'm eating, it sends me down that pathway still to this day. And I start to get anxiety and I start freaking out in my head. I was following a migraine protocol recently.
Ooh.
And she wanted you to eat a very specific way of eating where you had to track everything that went through your mouth because you needed to make sure that the potassium to sodium levels were exactly equivalent to each other. Wow. So not like it, right? Not a big deal. It's not about it was a keto diet, but I'm used to eating that way. So that part didn't bother me. It was that she wanted me to track in a tracker. And I did it for one day and I was like, can't do it. I can't do it. It instantly created so much anxiety. And I was so concerned with everything suddenly that was going in my mouth. And it brought me back to the old days of when I would freak over every single thing that I was putting in my mouth. Mm-hmm. And I tell my clients too, like, you should never have to track. You shouldn't have to use a Fitbit. You shouldn't have to use your Fitness Pal or Carb Manager. Our ancestors never had to do it. We shouldn't have to do it.
Honestly, I was like, okay, as soon as I get a little bit of a pause here, I was going to say something I like reminding people about is it seems as though, and I assume everyone listening to this video cast right now, puts a focus on their diet and eating very similar to the way our ancestors do, and just like focusing on real, whole, unprocessed, like nutrient dense foods, right? So the way I see it is if that's the way we're trying to eat, then why aren't we trying to like listen to our bodies in the same way? Like, it's all part of eating. So if the food that we're putting into our mouth is in line with the way our ancestors put food into their mouths, they also did not use like weigh scales and MyFitnessPal or other calorie counting apps and things like that, right?
Exactly.
Like everything that I do, I make sure that it's in alignment. So super important to me. And I love that you brought that up too.
Yes. I always say that. I'm like, your great grandmother was not wearing a Fitbit and she was probably not overweight. So let that tell you something. There was no such thing as calorie counting even back before like 1970s. They didn't even keep track of it because the obesity rate was so low. Yeah. So yes, it's about nourishing your body and listening to your body, not to your phone and what it's telling you how much to eat and when to eat it.
Yeah.
Not normal. Not right.
No, exactly. Yeah. So really like disordered eating would be anything that's not normal, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So just recently now, I just want to kind of go in a different direction here is you a couple years ago started to experience some symptoms of digestive issues. And I would love for you to talk about that journey a little bit of just discovering and what the symptoms you were having and what it led you to.
Yeah, honestly, it was a lot of symptoms. So I have a few blog posts on my website, and this started to take place in October of 2015. So I was just wrapping up the summer of literally feeling the best I had in my entire life. It was amazing. All things in my life just seemed to be going so well. And I did some traveling in September. I was a bridesmaid for my friend. So I was in the States for a period of time and, visited some other friends throughout the States, came back in October, and I was just like really sick. And the main issue that I started to have were migraines. Now, I had never really had a headache in my entire life. Like I could have probably counted the amount of times that I had a headache. And so when I started getting migraines, I was very like taken back and it made me open my eyes and think, well, like there's something not right because I don't even get headaches, you know. So started getting these migraines. I was also starting to have periods of extreme nausea and diarrhea all at the same time. And it was kind of happening in like a cycle. It was every month around the same time of the month, like all of this would happen. The migraines would happen much more often, but the vomiting and the diarrhea were kind of like cyclical. And I was also dealing with a huge amount of fatigue, which was another like new symptom for me. I am, you know, growing up, I was always called like Energizer Bunny. Like I could go, and like literally never stop. And so because of the fatigue, I actually started to think that I had adrenal issues, right? I mean, I was learning about adrenal fatigue at the time, and I basically convinced myself that I had stage 3 adrenal fatigue.
Wow.
So as a restorative wellness solutions practitioner, I can offer like salivary testing to test like the adrenals and see where our cortisol is at and some other sex hormones and whatnot. So I did one of those spit tests, and it took my cortisol readings throughout the day, you know, like 4 different readings. It came back, and I was going through a course at the time. And so my teachers were able to chime in and kind of, you know, give me some feedback and whatnot. And they both said, you know, based off of the symptoms that you're describing to us, like we have no idea, you know, this doesn't make sense. The amount of fatigue that you're experiencing is not reflecting in your adrenal results. And really, they were quite fine. You know, I look back at them even today and I'm like, yeah, there was basically nothing wrong, right? Which is strange, especially when I was feeling so fatigued. I was also very dizzy. I went from lifting weights. I love strength training, and I'm super into, you know, deadlifts and squats and stuff like that. So that was a very regular part of my life. Because I was so fatigued, but also dizzy, there were days where I literally couldn't even walk around the block. And I just felt so, again, disconnected from my body. I had no idea what was happening. I didn't change anything diet-wise. I didn't increase my activity level. There was something wrong, and I had no idea. We had our house tested for mold because one of my best friends was going through mold toxicity, and I was having very much the same symptoms as she was having. So she was like, Meg, I think you have toxic mold. And so we got our house tested for mold. The air was more pure than it was outside, which is rare because most households are actually dirtier than outside. So knew it wasn't anything to do with like mold affecting me. And then as also part of my practice, I am able to run comprehensive stool analysis. So that was one of the tests that I hadn't done. But like I said, most of my symptoms were, you know, fatigue, dizziness, stuff like that. It wasn't necessarily like all digestive related. So anyways, I did the stool test, and it revealed a parasite called Blastocystis hominis. So in August of 2016, that's when I found out that I had a parasite for almost a year of trying to figure things out.
Wow. So just for our audience to know, this is something else that I have in common with Meg, is very similar story actually of 10 years ago I'd always done lots of international travel, and I suddenly started to get chronic migraines and all these, and I actually never had the diarrhea, never had the flu, like the sickness, but I had lots of other weird stuff starting to happen in my body, skin rashes and years and years later, did a comprehensive stool test as well and found out that I also had Blastocystis hominis. So I still have mine. So I'm so keen on hearing how you,
oh,
what you
girl.
did with yours. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good note. I have been helping clients for the past year now get rid of it, and we do have 100% success rate. So
yay! Which is
awesome.
just so people know, it's a very challenging.
It's the most difficult parasite to eradicate, like according to many doctors that I've chatted with. But yeah, you bringing up more of the symptoms that you had, like skin rashes and whatnot. Right before, so it was like the June of the, like before the August that I found out what I was dealing with, I had my first like vaginal infection in my life. I was like, what is going on? And that is really when I was like, there's something going wrong. I woke up one morning, my eyes were like closed shut with pus. It was just literally everything. So when people ask me what my symptoms were because of a parasite, I'm like, name a symptom. I probably had it. Like, it was bad.
Yes. And there's lots of people that have it that don't get any symptoms because there's different types of blastocystis. My sister had it. I've had kids in my office that have had it. I've had people that have just, like you, traveled to the States and came back with it. Even in my town, it's known to be really prevalent in one of our most popular lakes outside the city. They actually, like, emergency doctors at the hospital call it the Shuswap parasite. That's the name of the lake. So blastocystis is far more common than people think, and very challenging to rid of.
Yeah. So although I do work with women with disordered eating and eating disorders and just mental health in general, the next thing that is the most common thing is like digestive function and just digestive health. And when we do run that comprehensive stool analysis, so many of the women come back with a parasite, and Blastocystis hominis is the most common for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did to get rid of yours?
Yeah. So I think before we actually hit record, you were saying that most of us go down like this huge rabbit hole of searching what will get rid of blasto. And I definitely did that night that I found out. Was in tears, basically convinced myself that I was never getting rid of this, that I had to feel like this my whole life, because there are some nasty forums happening about parasites and blasto in particular, and just people that are very, very hopeless about ever getting better. And so anyways, since I always choose nature first. However, I also believe in modern day medicine, and I am totally fine using modern medicine when the time comes. So I felt like this was one of those times. I was just diagnosed with a parasite, and I really felt as though, I needed antibiotics to really help me get rid of this thing. So my doctor ordered me a prescription. I honestly can't remember like what it is just off the top of my head.
Metronidazole.
Yeah.
I did it too.
I was like, it starts with an M. And so I did that for 10 days, didn't do anything. I did a retest, still had blasto. And from there I was kind of like, okay, like I know that I did that, and now I'm going to do my own thing. So I work a lot with essential oils within my practice. So I put together a protocol for myself using essential oils and herbal supplements. And immediately I started expelling worms. Blastocystis hominis is naked to the eye, you guys. So this was not blasto. It was worms. It was some other type of parasite or creature that was living within me, and these essential oils were really helping me eradicate that. I did feel better, obviously. My body was getting rid of some toxic things that did not need to be in there.
Some worms.
Yeah, exactly. And I did this protocol for 3 months. and retested, again positive for blasto. So that is when I did another protocol, which is the protocol I use with my clients today. It is a pretty aggressive herbal treatment that we use. And the reason I say aggressive is it's just herbal supplements that are in key doses that aren't on the bottle, but obviously they get rid of this parasite, and they work really, really well. And you can experience a lot of, crappy die-off feelings. So anyways, I did that from, the months of, February, March, April, and kind of gave myself a month off of all digestive supports, retested in June of last year, 2017. And that is when the results were negative for the parasite. And honestly, I've felt absolutely incredible ever since. I intuitively knew that I still had a parasite back this, when I retested the first time. I knew it wasn't gone because basically all of my symptoms were still there. Last summer when I retested, I almost didn't retest because I was I know I'm free of it, because I just knew. And the comprehensive stool analysis, they're not cheap. So
no, they're not.
yeah. So they're an investment, right? But yeah. I just figured okay, I'm going to retest and, kind of see what the state of my gut health is in now post-parasite. So anyways, yeah, retested in June of last year, and it did come back negative. But I mean, parasites create so much stress on the gut and really cause some other imbalances, dysbiosis and whatnot. So it was a good thing I retested, because I knew I was able to get rid of that parasite, but then I just had to work on some gut balancing. And yeah, now a year later, and it's very rare that I'm ooh, something's up with my digestion today,
I love it. So can you share with us did you use a specific product? Because I know that anyone that's got blasto, like myself, is probably tell us what you did.
Yeah. So it is a small list of herbal supplements, but there's, wormwood, and we use some Ayurvedic herbs and things like that, as well as I will talk about one thing that I commonly see that is not part of a parasite eradication protocol is addressing the biofilm. So this is not something that a lot of practitioners know about or address within protocols. And it's absolutely key is addressing biofilm. So when you do have a parasite, the parasite creates kind of a shell around it called biofilm. And so many of the parasite protocols that I see do not use a biofilm buster, we'll call it, right? So you're basically taking all of these supplements that are anti-parasitic, but if you're not busting up the shell around the parasite, it's really not doing much for you, right? So,
and same goes for Candida, for those that are listening. Same thing. You always want to use a biofilm disruptor. A really popular one is called Interface. You can get it on Amazon. Super key to taking in conjunction with parasite cleanses or a Candida cleanse. Even and a SIBO too, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. Yeah,
so it is Interface Plus. Is the biofilm disruptor, buster, the one that I like using, and it's super effective for sure.
And did you use, I know that one thing that an ingredient that I've heard a lot about recently is Mimosa Pudica. Did you put that into your regime as well?
No, I didn't. That wasn't part of this protocol. But another piece was I did use a lot of like clove essential oil. I took that internally. Also, there's a blend called Zendocrine, and that's a liver support. And with parasites, they can, obviously release lots of toxins within the body. And so I was making sure that I was supporting my liver health at the same time. That was super important, and I think key for parasitic infections as well. And then diet. I know you wanted to chat a little bit about that too. So making sure that my diet was supporting this journey that I was on as well.
Mm-hmm. So, and you did the ketogenic diet, right, to help with this?
Yeah, so similar to you, I have to be very careful with how I approach my eating style. And I always come from a place of just truly listening to my body and really not following any labels. However, during that time of my life when I was going through the parasite and all of that fatigue and everything like that, it was, showing up to me that my blood sugar really wasn't that balanced, not as balanced as I thought it was. So I started to increase my fats and just naturally decrease the amount of carbohydrates that I was eating at the time. And then as my parasite just kind of like worsened almost, like more and more symptoms were coming, it was almost like I couldn't tolerate carbohydrates. So I definitely did go very low carb and high fat to obviously replace those carbohydrates. But to this day, I have never tested my ketones. It was based off of how I feel in my body. Are my symptoms subsided? Are my goals being addressed, right? So I knew that I couldn't tolerate carbohydrates for that period of time, so I just didn't have them.
Yeah.
Now today, I reintroduced them probably like this winter, and I can tolerate them again, which is great. So I eat them again, right?
Oh,
so
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that that's such an important piece of you listening to your body. And I remember doing the same too. And there was a period of time where I wasn't doing very well, and I tried to do keto, and I was pushing against myself because I wanted to get all these amazing benefits that you hear. And actually at that time it wasn't working for me, and I had to come off of it, and later found out it was a thyroid issue. But listening to the body, and I know that parasites, candida, they really do well when you do take out a lot of those carbohydrates. Like you can definitely help to heal the system and heal the gut by taking out those inflammatory foods. So it's not even about like, oh, I'm following a keto or a paleo, or it's more like, okay, well, this is working for my body and it's making me feel better. Yeah.
And like when you're really coming from like a health perspective, I knew I wasn't following like a low carb, high fat diet for anyone else other than myself and like the situation I was in, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. We could sit here and talk for hours, Meg.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface and we're already out of time.
I know.
But so I'll just have to have you on again.
Yeah.
So can you tell, because I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna go, hey, I want more from you, or have parasites and they want to come to you. So or eating disorder. Tell us who you work with, where to find you, and kind of what you have to offer.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I do work primarily with women. That is my focus. I love supporting women in any aspect of their health. And really when it comes down to like what I do is I'm so passionate about supporting women in just like achieving like a level of freedom within their life, whether that is from, food restriction or food obsession or some type of health challenge that they're having, or any type of freedom that they want to experience within their life. I love supporting women in achieving that. So I do that through one-on-one nutrition coaching. As I mentioned, my focuses are definitely like disordered eating disorders, mental health, including like anxiety, depression, and then digestive health as well. And as I kind of mentioned before is, I offer testing through that practice. My and I work with everyone online, by the way, if I think that's important to mention. You don't have to be Canadian or in Saskatchewan. I actually don't see anyone in person. My business is 100% online. I have a podcast called the Unbreakable U Podcast, and I'll totally have to have you on. I would love that, so we can just like continue this chat.
I think I can safely say whoever is subscribed to this video cast, you're going to like her podcast and you're going to want to subscribe to hers, because it's very similar in the way of just trying to support women in every way that we can.
Yeah, well, thank you. So the Unbreakable You podcast, I'm really, really passionate about it. I actually just started it at the end of March, which is super exciting. It's my first solo podcast. Before that, I had 3 years of doing a co-hosted podcast called the Nourished Podcast, which was tons of fun. But I just wanted to go off into a different direction and chat about more than nutrition, and really focus on some things and some people that were really special to me personally. So that's another thing that I do. And I am very active on Instagram. I guess if you guys want to come and like find me, get a hold of me, get in contact with me, my website is megtherhn.com. So RHN stands for Registered Holistic Nutritionist. So megtherhn.com. And then Instagram is the best like social media platform to find me at. And I'm just Meg the RHN there as well. So that is, where you can find me for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And like I said, I'm going to have you on again, because I feel like we've only scratched the surface on so many of these hot topics that I think are under discussed. So we'll have to do it again. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.